Hi, and welcome to the second edition of Think with Google Live. Today we're talking about online video and branded content. We've got an amazing group of panelists here today to talk about it. And please send in all your questions and your comments using the hashtag #ThinkWithGoogleLive. You can see in the top right of your screen. And we'll pick the best of these, the best of the questions, and put them to the panel at the end of the session. So let me introduce my panelists. First of all, we have Susan Agliata, Head of Branded Content at YouTube. Sitting next to her is Ben Hooper, Head of Content at Karmarama. Nick Cohen, Managing Partner at Mediacom, until Monday, when he joins Little Dot Studios. And finally, last but not least, Kristian Dean, National Content Manager at Audi UK. So let's kick off with you, Nick. Content consumption habits. Obviously, we mean in terms of people's use behavior, TV versus online video.
Well, I mean, obviously, we're seeing a massive rise in online video usage. If you look at any of the main services, we're seeing huge rises. I mean, if you look at YouTube, I think you're on something like 4 billion views a day. iPlayer, I think that's 25% up year on year. Netflix have just posted above expectations growth in subscribers. You know, all of the different players in that area, including people like Facebook, moving much more into video. It's unquestionable that there is a huge rise in online video consumption at the moment. But I think it's a slight mistake to think that it's kind of a zero-sum game with TV and that all comes out of television. Because actually, for overall audiences, TV hasn't declined that much. In younger audiences, we're seeing quite interesting and significant declines. But you know, it remains to be seen what happens in the long term. And I think what's very, very interesting is the way that consumption of online video has actually increased the total pot of video consumption. So it's not all coming from TV, but it's definitely on the rise.
Ben, is this something you're seeing?
Absolutely. I mean, I think like it means that you've got to look at the exact environments where people are engaging with content and letting that tailor how your creative process works. It means that you don't just you're putting your audience at the very core of everything that you do. So whether that's sort of watching video on your mobile on the way to work or watching desktop, you know, you've got to try and tailor your approach to those particular habits.
Okay, and let's move on. Talk about mobile. All we hear at the moment is about how much people are moving on to mobile from the fixed web. What are we seeing with video on mobile?
Mobile is absolutely critical. So on YouTube, we see half of all views are now on mobile devices. So I think the key message for certainly brands that are thinking about where to distribute their content is mobile has to be first and foremost.
What issues are there with video on a mobile device?
I think certainly there are challenges in terms of connectivity, but what we are seeing is that users who watch video on mobile devices, and that includes tablets, are actually more engaged with that content. And there's a very good reason for that. I think it's a more intimate experience. They're choosing to watch that content on the device at that time of their choosing.
Okay, Kristian, let's talk about video, mobile video or online from a brand's point of view. How are you seeing the use of video increase at your own company?
I think the use of online video is, first and foremost, I'd say now, it's not a luxury. I think it was seen as an added extra, a bonus, if you like. But now I think brands are really waking up to the fact that this is no longer a luxury. It's expected. When when consumers visit your platforms, they expect to be entertained and they expect video content. They don't want to be sitting in front of a tablet or a PC and read, you know, paragraphs of text. You know, they want to catch it in video content. So I think it's an absolute necessity now. But I think what I'm seeing is it allows brands to kind of flex their personality a lot more. And traditional media plans where, you know, we're a business. You know, we're governed by new product launches, and our traditional ad campaigns need to primarily focus on awareness of those new products. And it's very hard to do that in a 30-second window with all the regulations we have in terms of TV advertising, to actually let the personality breathe as well. And online content allows us to kind of glue it all together, if you like.
So video in effect is letting you tell your story better.
Yeah, much better. There's stuff we can talk about in terms of online content that we would never normally be able to justify creating a big above-the-line campaign for, with the media investment that goes with that. Not to say that you know, we just build a lot of content and, you know, build it and they will come, because that will not work. You do need a very clear seeding strategy and budget in order to guarantee success. But yeah.
How important is the ability to tell stories across platforms, i.e. TV to online and maybe onto mobile? That's a question for anyone here.
I think what's very interesting in the way that people are using media at the moment is that it's there's a lot of synchronous usage going on, certainly. So people using as while they're also watching TV or looking at outdoor or whatever it is. And I think that would sort of, I think that means that we all have to think about the ways that these messages are being delivered across different media and the interaction between those different media. So yeah, I definitely think that's incredibly important. I mean, certainly from a media agency perspective, looking at that whole system of communications and how one thing leads to another is really, really critical to what we're advising our clients about at the moment.
It actually changes the nature of the creative content as well. So, you know, TV commercials, you normally were restricted to, you know, 60-second and then a 30-second cut down to say everything you wanted to say about the product and the brand, and that was it. And you run it for 6 weeks, and then you go quiet. And I think the changing nature of online content now potentially means that TV commercials are simply, you know, directors online. That's where I see it going.
I think you need at the very top level sort of conversations with brands. It's about creating generous ideas, which, you know, we always talk about big ideas, but these ideas that need to fall into all the different verticals that brands, you know, sort of creative output. So you need something that is almost like a content marketing mindset, which is what's going to be interesting to people, why people are going to share it, why people are going to watch it, and it needs to fall into the same advertising through to sort of social content, through to sort of CRM and to PR as well.
Generous ideas, I love that idea. So how do you see that translating?
Well, ultimately, I think about it as liquid content. So the same content could live easily on TV, on mobile, on desktop, in apps, in really any form. And I think what's key is that the production model and the distribution model has to change to adapt to that. So we're no longer in the world of producing one 30-second spot for the year. We're in a world where brands need to produce more and more content on a regular basis and have an always-on strategy.
I think that's fascinating. Audi, what sort of challenges does that throw up if you have to produce content all the time and be always on? Surely that's not an easy step to take.
No, it's not. And I'll be honest with you, it was a challenge for us at Audi. But you know, we work with some very good agencies, and they have. You know, we've restructured our end. I think it's really important, you know, to make a commitment as a brand to show that we're really behind this. So we have done that, and our agencies have similarly restructured. So there's a whole new way of working. The kind of traditional agency, sort of very linear and long time frame to create a TV commercial, that has to go. We need to work much faster, much quicker, and yes, in order to produce the sheer volume of content that consumers demand now. So yeah, we've geared up, and our agencies have geared up too. So we're working with Mediacom, Mediacom Beyond Advertising, and Black Sheep Studios, part of BBH. These are new new companies that set up purely to service our needs. So it's an exciting time.
Nick, you're obviously about to go and join a different sort of agency on Monday, Little Dot Studios. How have you seen the agency structure changed to take account of this new consumer behaviour online?
I think all agencies are struggling to sort of reinvent themselves and evolve in the face of a rapidly changing media environment. And I think some are doing a very good job of doing that. Others may be struggling a bit more. But I think the speed of change is something that's very, very hard to deal with sometimes for big organisations. When looking at a company like Little Dot is in a slightly different place. I mean, they are a producer of content and run channels and so on. So they produce content for brands as well as TV broadcasters and running their own channels. So they're in a slightly different place to an agency. But I think what's really interesting about businesses like that and other similar kinds of businesses operating in that area, you know, the sort of maker studios and people like that, is they are blending production with sort of an inherent mindset about the constant updating of information and running a channel. And I think that's a very different way of working to a traditional advertising agency and production house model. So you know, I think a lot of these things can all coexist. It's not like one thing replaces the other, but I do think that there's a really, really important skill set emerging there, which sort of blends production with a very different way of thinking about communicating through video.
Let's go to talk. The next stage of that is the impact on the creative process. You know, Ben, I'd like to turn to you on this and how that, especially video, mobile video, how does this impact the creative process in the whole industry, agencies and client side?
In a huge way. I think, like, fundamentally, like, you have to have a more collaborative creative process where you're not just sort of like selling into sort of a traditional TV team and expecting them to come up with something that's going to work. You need to have people who understand PR, social, and in an ideal world, you have these neutral creatives who understand much more about what's right for the audience, as opposed to, you know, pushing product messaging and brand messaging at the very forefront. It's about sort of how you balance that all out. You then need to combine that, as Nick was saying, like, with a production process, which is very different to how traditional ad agencies work. You need to be much more like a broadcaster. It needs to be very nimble and cost effective as well, because the most important thing about, I think, mobile video and online video is quantity and scale. And you need to be able to create impact. You need to be there consistently over a long period of time. And with that comes distribution as well. So you're now thinking about, instead of just hiding behind paid media, which traditionally was also what happened, you now need to then think about how you're going to get this piece of work out there in front of the right people. And that needs to be built into the creative process as well. So it's much more complex. It's really exciting. And yeah, and it was absolutely spot on. It's about blending these different skills of production, acting like a broadcaster, like a TV station, really. And how do you get sort of creative agencies to start thinking like that? So it's a real challenge, but it's an exciting one.
Kristian, turn to you on the same point about the creative process and how that's changing. Ben talked about brands being a publisher, being a TV broadcaster. Is that sort of process happening at Audi?
We did experiment with Audi TV a few years ago. I think the problem was that actually the business hadn't really geared up to serve and to create the content required. I mean, your own TV channel is a pretty hungry beast, and we just simply didn't have the resource to keep feeding it. So although the initial audiences were pretty strong, unless you can continue to create the right kind of content that people want to watch, people will go elsewhere. I mean, you have to look, I mean, if you click on your browser, you can go anywhere and look at anything at the click of a mouse now. So there's a lot of competition, and to expect people to come to your area and expect you to somehow be, a brand to somehow claim to be the sort of font of all knowledge on one particular subject is a pretty arrogant thing to do. So I think I would shy away from seeing us as necessarily a kind of channel in our own right. Sure, we need our own platforms, but I think one of the big trends I see is brands partnering up with existing platforms, existing production companies, and assets like that in order to co-create. I think.
Nice segue. Sue, let's talk about how you see it at YouTube, how you see this new creativity and how you're helping brands to partner in the way Kristian talked about.
Yeah, and I think we're at a really critical time as organizations are trying to become publishers, in that it's not a sustainable model yet. I think we're working towards that, but we're not quite there yet. I think in the meantime, as we support brands in working towards always as content strategies, we absolutely suggest exploring partnering with YouTube creators or the relevant little dots of the world to reach those new audiences and really engage with their fans. And ultimately, we give them recommendations from our most successful YouTube creators. They've done it well. They've been successful on the platform. They know how to do it best. So we very much suggest that we look to those innovators and those creators first and foremost in terms of how to approach a content strategy on the platform.
Let's talk a bit more about our YouTubers, YouTube creators. I mean, this has been the success story of the last few years. It's come out almost out of nowhere, it seems. Likes of Zoella now signing books all over the street. So let's talk a bit about how brands and agencies can use the lessons that you've learned with these creators and are still learning. and apply those into, I guess, turning just viewers into fans?
Yeah. So ultimately, YouTube is a platform of passion. So you have the Zoellas of the world, you have the Jamie Olivers of the world. It's about food and beauty and sports. And working with YouTube creators is one of the most effective ways for brands to engage with new audiences. So it's not the only strategy and shouldn't be the end-all be-all of any sort of content strategy, but it is a great way to reach those new audiences. Ultimately, brands need to entertain and inspire, and working with YouTube creators is an excellent way to begin that journey.
Has anyone else on the panel had any experience of working with YouTube creators?
I think there's something really interesting about the way that those creators are forging a new type of video experience. And I think it's quite linked to mobile and tablets, because it feels very warm to watching a lot of those channels. It feels like someone's talking directly to you. You can engage with them. And if your typical consumer of that video is using a mobile device, it's a very different thing to the evolution of watching television. It feels very new and very different. And I think, therefore, can be immensely powerful for brands if you get it right, because you've got that kind of really direct relationship. And as Kristian was saying, you know, partnering with people who have that kind of relationship and that following is always going to be a good thing for a brand, as long as you do it in the right way.
It's interesting you say that. It has to be done the right way. I
Yeah.
completely agree.
What's the wrong way?
Well, I think a lot of people seem to forget that perceptually, certainly looking on mobile devices, people are a lot less patient, a lot less tolerant of substandard content. And I think, whereas, you know, just on a personal level, I might, you know, come home one evening and the TV will be on in the corner, but, you know, you'll dip in and out, and, you know, to be honest, it could be anything on there. Whereas actually, if you're engaged on your mobile or a tablet, and you're, you know, after 30 seconds, you know, you feel this is not going anywhere, boom, you're gone. So I think there is a real need to get that absolutely right, and you know, capture people's attention early on in the right way.
I think just to add to that, I mean, it's a good editorial process for brands to go through to work with YouTubers, because they can't just see it as a media buy. It's got to be something which is like their message and their product, whatever it might be, is blended really properly into whatever story or whatever piece of content the YouTuber is creating. And that goes back to that. If it's not done properly, it'll annoy the audience of the YouTuber, and it'll make the brand look silly.
You have no choice but to be authentic.
Yeah, you have, absolutely.
House around the industry. Okay, we are, gosh, there's not enough time, but let's move on to, I'd like to have one tip from each of you, one trend, one thing that you'd like the audience to really focus on how that they can think of best using online video and branded content. And we'll start with Kristian.
I would say probably a one tip or trend I think that we're going to see a lot more is brands partnering with each other, not necessarily with content creators, but I mean, obvious examples like Red Bull, for example, would be a strong candidate for many brands. I would love to partner with them, I'm sure. But actually, it gives an opportunity for both brands to kind of flex their personalities a little bit, and obviously co-creating, sharing budgets. You know, it's becomes good business sense as well.
Fantastic. Nick?
I think one of the interesting trends we're going to see is going back to that thing we were just talking about, where there's a youth audience coming to YouTubers in a very one-to-one way. I think we're going to really start seeing that spread out to other demographics and, you know, older audiences and other types of audiences. And I think we're going to see some really interesting new types of channels and creators that have that same connection with an audience, but aren't necessarily youth-focused. And I think that will be hugely transformatory for the media industry, actually.
Great. Ben?
I think there's going to be, thankfully, like a lot more self-awareness over the next year, where people are more understanding of exactly what is it that's interesting about their brand or product that they have to say, and getting it right. I think there's been a lot of lessons learned of how Facebook's changed and become a straight-up media channel versus what it could have been, which was much more of a editorially driven like brand opportunity. I think I think that's going to happen a lot more this year.
Okay, fantastic. Sue, lastly.
And I agree 100% with Nick. I think we're going to see a major transformation in the type of content that is produced. So as the makers grow, as the MCNs grow, we're going to see more and more channels. And ultimately, the platform, YouTube at least, is going to grow up a little bit. So we're going to go from the Zoellas to, I think moms a little bit more. And that's great for the ecosystem generally.
Now, we're going to turn now to Q&A. We've got hundreds of questions pouring in. You've still got about 10-ish minutes, so keep sending them in. I'm going to pick some of the best here. How about this? This is while not tricky, slightly tricky. Jennifer asks, how can brands ensure transparency with branded content? Thinking about the ASA ruling, where vloggers must say when they're paid with the brand, that recent famous case with Oreo. Again, this is always in the top of people's minds. Let's start with Kristian.
Sorry, how can we be more transparent?
How can we be more transparent? And Jennifer points out the recent ASA ruling that found that vloggers didn't necessarily state they've been paid to talk about Oreo.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the Oreo example is quite interesting. I mean, personally, I would never go down that route anyway. I think, you know, consumers, they're far too smart. They'll smell a rat a mile off. So it's not something I think I would ever consider. I think certainly from my perspective, I think we've got a lot of honesty in our brand, which currently exists. So it's not a problem we've got. I think the problem, not the problem, but I think the task we have really is to show a little bit more of our personality, sort of behind the curtain, if you like. I think sometimes brands can be very formal in their communication, and I'm not saying we kind of we try and change who we are overnight, but I think most consumers will react positively to a slightly more human approach.
Anyone else got any thoughts on that transparency and importance of?
I think it falls down to the brand wanting to co-create really interesting content. If the content's interesting enough, you can still signpost it as branded, but the story's got to be worthwhile. Like just product references is just not, I don't think, unless, for Oreo, it's just not good enough. They need to be doing more. They need to be sort of giving whatever that YouTuber's doing an experience, or it needs to be something which is more entertaining than just referencing a biscuit.
Yeah, and I think that's key. Just to add, studies have shown that users are not adverse to branded content that is truly branded. And I think the numbers show that that's absolutely acceptable method of communicating with your audience.
And it always comes back to the brand as well. I would advise any brand who are seeking to do anything like that to make sure that it's transparent and overt that they are funding it. Because if anything does go wrong with it, it's always going to be the brand, I think, who get held out to dry the most, you know.
Okay, let me turn to the next question. Jan asks, I'm going to start with you, Sue. Will there be a shift to online video ads towards TV-style ads, i.e. without the possibility to skip? Obviously, skipping ads is a big issue for everyone.
A good question. So I think we are seeing a major shift in how users engage with ads as well as native content. I think there is a place for each type of ad format, depending on the brand objectives. Certainly, I think that the nature of ads, the creative of ads is changing as well to be a little more human, I think a little bit more engaging. So I'd actually say the trend is the other way and shifting to be less TV-like in some ways. Okay.
Same to all of you, this big issue about is online ads video more like TV ads where you can't skip the ad.
It's weird. I've recently got a Chromecast, you'll be pleased to hear, and it's really interesting. I keep getting served these unskippable ads, and it's quite strange. I'm so much more accommodating to that on a TV screen. It's very weird. Like I sort of get used to it as long as they're not too long.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'll be interested to see how different devices have an effect on that. I have very low tolerance for non-skippable in an online environment, but as soon as it's on the TV screen, my tolerance seems to go up weirdly.
Okay, let me turn now to a question. This is for everyone. What's the best strategy to produce and promote branded videos? Is it in-house with a production agency or a partner with a content publisher? Obviously, you represent all of those options among you. So what's your advice, the best strategy to produce and promote this amazing video that people out there are creating?
Depends what you're trying to do. I think if you're trying to have regular output as a brand, very much from your brand's own voice, then you either need some sort of internal resource or a specialist agency to work with to produce that video, I think. Whereas if you want to do something, we've talked a lot about partnerships and partnering with existing media outlets, that can work in a very different way, and you might want a different set of agencies and partners involved. So I think it very much depends on what you're trying to achieve as a brand.
And also the scale. I mean, we are looking at very much a kind of three-tiered kind of content strategy, where Tier 1 is our traditional above-the-line TV. Tier 3 is more of the kind of hygiene content, if you like, where we need video content on our website to explain how our products work and to show them off to the full extent. But then we've got this Tier 2 content, which is much more the brand engagement side of things. And that's where I think, the Tier 3 stuff, we can kind of do that in-house primarily, albeit with a few dedicated agency partners. But the Tier 2 stuff, that's where I think we've got real potential to flex and look around and co-create with other brands and other platforms. So for us, it's going to be very much a mix.
Just on that briefly, just my personal interest, how's that changing the structure of your business, Audi? It hasn't been a content producer yet, in the past, has it? So what new skills are you needing?
Yeah, I mean, it has been. I mean, we've reshuffled our marketing function around this, and we had some very interesting learnings from some econometrics we've been running the last couple of years as well. So to come back to a point that was raised earlier, that this isn't about replacing the above the line media landscape, because we know TV advertising works incredibly well for us in building that rapid awareness very, very quickly. But yeah, we've had to gear up as a business to look beyond that, because 4 big product launches a year, you can only say so much above the line in that format. And we've got some fantastic brand properties. Quattro, for example, our all-wheel drive system. Sorry, it's not an ad on it. But I mean, we've got fantastic stories there. It's a fantastic feature on our cars, and yet we don't really do enough with it, and and we need to tell more of these engaging stories around that. And I say online content gives us opportunity to really explore that area.
Yeah, and we advise brands that whichever method they choose, in-house or various agencies, it has to be sustainable, because you have to commit to that strategy. It has to be long-term. It's not going to be 4 weeks, 6 weeks. It's going to be a year of really thinking differently and behaving differently about content production.
Moving from a broadcast always on mindset again.
If you look at the way that Red Bull do it, and that's a real commitment to a long-term plan of becoming a media brand. They have set up, editorial teams, video production teams. I mean, I think the only thing they outsource is occasionally video production. Everything else, from strategy through distribution, everything else is managed in-house. But it's a separate part of the business. I mean, it's almost like a separate company.
But you wouldn't recommend, believe that every brand can do?
Absolutely not. You've got to have the self-awareness to know exactly what's interesting about it. I mean, they've gone for that because of the sort of the nature of the way their brand's been shaped, and that's allowed them to tell these amazing stories. But they are so unique, so different, and they're on the sort of that part of the business was originally set up. It wasn't meant to sell energy drinks. So most other companies, this function has got to have some kind of payoff. Whilst Red Bull's is purely just to grow themselves as a media brand, and their actual can business has stayed separate. I mean, I think they're a bit more entwined now, but when it first started, it was just create great content.
It's a very important point that actually, especially for brands that are kind of finding their way in this territory now, is to be really, really clear in terms of the targets you're setting and the objectives for each piece of activity you're producing. And I'm sure we will have experience dealing with CEOs, and what they really like to see and what they really understand are facts and figures, and pre and post, before and after. What are we achieving? Has it worked? And it's not enough to simply create a lot of sort of interesting, fun stuff that's engaging, unless we can dramatically show it's moved things on. And it won't necessarily always be in terms of sales immediately. We know as a brand that brand desirability is a hugely important metric for us. And we've learned over the last couple of years that there is a direct correlation through to sales. There is a lag, but it does actually affect sales. So, by creating content and really committing to this, we aim to try and build this brand desirability measure, which will eventually pay dividends to us. But we need to measure it very closely and keep reporting to senior management.
It's commitment, isn't it? It's comes out of your patience, particularly with the purchase cycle of a car. You've got, you have to stay with them for a long period of time, and it's a great model to sort of you have to commit to it for more than a year. It's got to be a 2-3 year thing.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, we've had artificial metrics such as views, for example, interfere with really that exploration of what's the ROI on this content that we're producing. So I'd love to see a return to that discussion a little bit, and what is the effectiveness of this branded content that we're producing beyond just the view.
Fantastic. We're out of time. I can't believe it's gone that quickly. I've got questions still pouring in, so I think we're going to have to thank you so much. You've all been fantastic. Thanks very much for listening and viewing, everyone. Today's broadcast will be available archived on the Think with Google website. And please come back next week when we have the next edition of Think with Google Live, this time on programmatic. So again, thank you so much to my panelists. You've all been really great. And the insight again will be available on the Think with Google website. Thank you so much for viewing.